In 1845, 129 men sailed from England aboard two of the most advanced ships ever built. They were chasing glory, the dream of mapping the last uncharted route across the Arctic. None of them came back. When rescue teams finally found what was left of the Franklin expedition, they uncovered something horrifying. Abandoned ships, graves carved in ice, and evidence of cannibalism among the crew. This is the story of the expedition that walked into madness, a tale of ambition, arrogance, and survival against an unforgiving world. The early 1800s were the golden age of British exploration. The Arctic was the final frontier, a place of mystery and promise. Britain's navy dominated the seas, and national pride demanded new discoveries. Finding the Northwest Passage, a sea route linking the Atlantic and Pacific through the Arctic, was considered the greatest geographic challenge of its time. Many had tried, many had failed. The Arctic swallowed ships whole and froze men where they stood. But by the 1840s, confidence was high. Steam engines, iron hulls, and canned food made explorers believe they could finally tame the ice. The man chosen to lead this new mission was Sir John Franklin, a 59-year-old veteran explorer. He was respected but also stubborn. His last Arctic expedition decades earlier had nearly starved to death. Still, he was determined to finish what he'd started. Franklin's fleet would consist of two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, both reinforced for polar conditions with steam engines, iron plating, and enough supplies to last 3 years. The mission: sail through the Arctic from the Atlantic to the Pacific and return as heroes. But what they didn't know was that the Arctic had other plans. On May 19, 1845, the two ships left England with 129 men aboard. Spirits were high. Newspapers called it the most prepared voyage in British history. Franklin's officers included some of the Navy's best: Captain Crozier of HMS Terror and Lieutenant Gore of HMS Erebus. The ships carried libraries, musical instruments, and even fine china, symbols of civilization in a place that had none. Their last known stop was Greenland. Local whalers saw them in July, anchored in Baffin Bay, the last open water before the polar ice. Then they vanished. The ships pushed westward into the maze of islands and frozen channels that make up the Canadian Arctic. They reached Beechey Island, where the crew spent their first winter. When the ice thawed the next summer, they continued deeper into uncharted waters. But soon the ships became trapped, locked in pack ice near King William Island. They would never sail again. A note later discovered in a stone cairn recorded their situation. All well. Wintered in 1846, Sir John Franklin commanding. It was signed by Lieutenant Gore. The note was cheerful, confident, but a second message, added a year later in 1847, told a very different story. Sir John Franklin is dead. The ships have been deserted. 105 souls remain. 1847 to 1848. The descent. As the ice refused to melt, supplies dwindled. The crew began to starve. Their canned food, meant to sustain them, turned out to be tainted with lead from poor sealing. The men began showing symptoms: hallucinations, confusion, and madness. Franklin himself died in June 1847, likely from illness and exhaustion. His second-in-command, Francis Crozier, took over. In April 1848, the remaining men abandoned the ships, dragging lifeboats and sleds across the frozen wasteland toward the south, hoping to reach the nearest trading post, over 1,000 kilometers away. Inuit witnesses later described seeing small groups of starving Europeans wandering aimlessly across the ice. Some crawling, some crying out. None survived. 1850s. The search begins. When the ships failed to return, panic spread in Britain. Dozens of search parties were launched. For years, rescuers scoured the Arctic, finding only scattered clues: 3 graves on Beechey Island, marked with names and dates, cans of food stacked neatly beside snow shelters, pieces of wood carved with initials. Then Inuit hunters began telling stories of white men dragging boats over the ice, of piles of bones left behind, and of men who ate each other. The reports were dismissed at first. Victorian England refused to believe that noble British sailors could resort to cannibalism, but the evidence mounted. Bones recovered from King William Island showed knife marks, clean cuts where flesh had been removed. Scientific analysis decades later confirmed it. The men of the Franklin expedition had turned on each other in their final days. 2014 to 2016, the discovery for more than a century, the fate of the ships remained one of the greatest mysteries in exploration. Then in 2014, Canadian archaeologists made a stunning discovery. The wreck of the HMS Erebus was found, perfectly preserved beneath icy waters. 2 years later, the HMS Terror was located as well, still upright, its interior sealed in darkness. The ships were time capsules, frozen moments from 1846. Inside, plates still sat on tables. Shoes lay neatly beside bunks. Modern scans revealed that both ships had been abandoned in an orderly fashion, suggesting that the crew still hoped to survive, right until the end. The human cost. The Franklin expedition became a national obsession. Britain spent more money searching for Franklin than it had to find any other lost explorers combined. In the decades that followed, dozens of books and paintings romanticized the mission, portraying Franklin as a martyr of discovery. But the truth was far darker. The men had been victims of overconfidence, trusting flawed technology and ignoring indigenous knowledge of Arctic survival. Inuit communities had lived successfully in those regions for centuries. They knew how to travel light, hunt seals, and adapt. Franklin's expedition brought none of that humility. Instead, they brought silverware and uniforms, the trappings of empire. When everything collapsed, they had no way to cope. One Inuit elder, interviewed generations later, said, "They were proud men. They would rather die Englishmen than live as us." In the end, they did. Lessons from the ice. The story of the Franklin expedition isn't just about tragedy, it's about the cost of ambition. Franklin's men weren't evil or foolish. They were products of an age that believed the world could be conquered with courage and science alone. But in the Arctic, neither were enough. The ice is patient. It doesn't care about flags, pride, or history. For over a century, it kept their secret, preserving a reminder of what happens when human ambition meets the limits of nature. Today, as explorers and scientists continue to uncover fragments of that doomed voyage, we're left with one haunting image: 129 men walking into a white horizon, believing they were on the edge of discovery, not madness. And perhaps that's what exploration truly is: a fragile line between hope and hubris, drawn in the ice.